Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly hangout where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable or on the Facebook event page for episode 90. As for introductions, we will go around and do name, lodge, and generation for the topic of tonight's show. My name is John Ruark. I am a past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957, in Fairfax, Virginia, and I am a millennial. And we'll hand it off to Nick Johnson.
I'm Nick Johnson, has been Corinthian Lodge number 67, Big Time Farmington. And interestingly enough, I have a blog called millennialfreemason.com. So that would make me on the border.
A Gen X. It's safe to say you're a millennial.
Yes.
Who's Gen Y?
Gen Y. Yeah. We'll talk about that difference soon. Jason.
Hey everybody, Jason Richards, Junior Warden of Acacia Lodge number 16 in good old Clifton, Virginia for another couple weeks, and God knows what's going to happen. And I am the youngest member of the Masonic Roundtable, so I qualify as millennial last time I checked.
Yeah, you haven't broke the year 2000 mark yet for being born. And last but not least for tonight, our special guest and returning guest, our friend and brother, Worshipful Eric Diamond, past master of Oriental Lodge number 33 in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Eric Diamond, Oriental Lodge number 33, past master, and I am an X, which makes me the granddaddy of the group.
If we have any questions about
hey, you kids, get off of my lawn!
What it was like with doing lodge minutes on stone tablets, you're our guy.
That's right. That's right.
Wait, you saw Back to the Future in the theaters?
I did.
Wow, there's so many questions I have.
I remember waiting in line for Star Wars 1, or episode, whatever they call it now.
Yeah, I'm going to go see Star Wars in December. It's going to be great. You know, it's sad. I'm going to be telling my kids that, too, one day. Alrighty. Let's move into Masonic news. This week in Masonic news, nothing happened.
Not a thing.
Not a thingy-dingy.
Yeah, we're now going to go to Nick Johnson for the MMQOT.
Wait. I did find one piece of news.
Okay.
Just late breaking. Now, this happened quite a bit ago and kind of blew up on the internet. Let me share my screen. Of course, unless you've been under a Masonic rock, or stone, as it were, Georgia Freemasonry had their Grand Lodge last week, their Grand Annual Communication, and decided to make a long-standing rule official where it does now formally outlaw homosexuality in its ranks.
Go even further. And fornication.
And fornication.
Yeah, details, but let's focus on it.
That was kind of put in there as a Hail Mary.
Yeah.
You know, I'm glad to see the reaction amongst the Masonic blogosphere is of outrage and shock, right? Yeah. That this is even a thing in 2015. We can tie this back to some of our generational differences later on in the episode, but let's just take it at face value right now. You know, there's really nothing in the landmarks of Masonry that have anything to do with what a Mason does in his bedroom, period.
But the Bible says...
No, wait. There's nothing in the landmarks of Masonry that go into that detail. So for them to do this, well, one, you could say it's an innovation in Masonry. Maybe not. But just at the pure surface value, I mean, it is the South, and from what I've heard is that it was a close vote. I mean, this was a democratic vote on the floor of the Grand Lodge, where not only masters but all the previous past masters also had a vote to take this amendment in
Now,
So,
this wasn't anything really new, though, because the Grand Lodge of Georgia has had this in their code forever. But the Grand Master's edict back in September after the Tennessee incident reaffirmed that. And so they voted whether or not to keep that edict. And
Well, congratulations. They've managed to bring politics and religion into the lodge.
oh, touche.
Well,
And so, go ahead, Nick.
Well, and the thing is, actually, it's the thing that we should be thankful for in this whole thing is that in our Grand Lodge system, things can be compartmentalized, right?
yes.
So just because this decision has been made, it does not affect the rest of us, at least in actual terms. Now, obviously, a PR standpoint, this is terrible news because nobody out in the rest of the world understands that, that there isn't this overarching thing. But at least it compartmentalizes it in this respect. Now, that doesn't mean that Grand Encampment couldn't do this on its Grand Commanderies. And so I sure hope anyone who's listening from Grand Encampment or a voting member of it doesn't think that this is a good idea.
Now, I do want to say, too, that, perfect point. A lot of comments that came on a lot of the Facebook groups and blogosphere, go to the point where every Grand Lodge in every state in the United States is sovereign, right? They can make their own rules, but we are a global fraternity. That's one of the beautiful aspects of the fraternity is that it is recognized worldwide. And so when something like this happens, it totally tarnishes the image of Freemasonry. And to your point, the layman's not going to understand, oh, well, that's just Georgia. We still recognize them, but they're different because they have their own rules. And you know what? Let's stop making excuses. There's a lot of people that say, oh, well, they're sovereign. They can do what they want. Who am I to say what's in someone's jurisdiction? But I think, my personal opinion, this should be something that is part of public embarrassment that needs to happen from within our ranks, right? From you and your Grand Lodge. Go to your Grand Lodge and say this is unacceptable.
I mean, we can't sweep this under the rug.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm going to be talking about this in the next episode of X-Oriente. But what this also does is it exposes one of the weaknesses of the Grand Lodge system. In that, because we're this distributed system where all these different Grand Lodges are sovereign, it only takes one Grand Lodge to tarnish the entire fraternity, across that. So and because of the fact that guys move now, and this is sort of a generational thing too, which we'll get to, but because guys move now so much around the country and communication is so instantaneous, it's really hard for one Grand Lodge to do something without it affecting everybody. Yet we don't have, in the Grand Lodge system that we have in the United States, we don't have any sort of governance, like inter-Grand Lodge governance. Like, all we have is the North American Conference of Grandmasters, which is more of an advisory body.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up a good point, too. It's on the internet now, right? You can't unring a bell, to use Robert Johnson's quote. This is out there. It's going to be now available for any Google search when you want to find out what's going on in Masonry. This is going to be one of the many results, right? So it's out there. We have to do PR, and the best PR is, as Jason said, not to sweep it under the rug, but to come out against it. And this is step one right here.
Well, and especially because, this whole idea of keep it in the fraternity, that doesn't happen anymore. Just to inform everybody who says that, we live in an internet age. It's been around for, a couple decades. That doesn't happen anymore. So just don't be stupid. Just don't make stupid things. And this is going to come out in the public. So just don't be stupid.
Well, it's like you say, Nick. Don't give Grandpa the keys to the Bentley, right?
Oh,
because it's to your point, Eric, where it's not just the Grand Lodges are no longer, their impacts are no longer sovereign, but also because of the benevolent dictatorship we have, often benevolent, in this case not, there's so much power given to a single authority figure through edicts and influence that this kind of stuff happens. It's insane.
Well, to anybody who's listening who's not a Mason and is considering joining the fraternity, I just want to go on the record saying I stand with my gay brothers in Georgia, in Tennessee, anywhere where Masonic membership is threatened because of one's race, one's sexual orientation, one's ethnicity, anything like that. That is not, in my opinion, that is not what Masonry stands for. And I just want to go on the record as saying that so that people know that this is not Masonry as we know it, and the Masonry that I came into the fraternity for.
Yeah, unacceptable.
I've said this a zillion times. Being a Christian myself and an advocate for gay marriage, Masonry is not a Christian organization. Stop trying to treat it as such. It's a system of morality, sure.
But the Bible says.
But if you throw around, well, but the Bible says, I'm sorry, that doesn't cut it with me, and it won't ever.
Well, don't we say that the Bible is the rule and guide of our faith?
Right.
Not of Masonry. Not of Masonry, of our faith.
It could also be allegorical.
Dun, dun, dun.
Not the Bible being the rule and guide of your faith.
Oh, no. Don't tell me it's symbolic. I like to take everything at face value. That's what I need.
6,000 years ago. So another article that was floating around in reaction to was actually an article that was written in 2010, but shows the other side of the coin, where Kentucky Masons have voted against outlawing openly gay men. So there is precedence of taking the opposite approach and saying instead of this group is allowed, it's we are forbidden from discriminating against a certain group. So that's good on Kentucky, good on them that they did it 5 years ago. But for context, again, it's not every Grand Lodge, and hopefully we can take the keys back from Grandpa.
Well, and that's a generalization, of course, but at the same time, this isn't anything new, and that's what this other article shows us. Discrimination based on race and sexual preference has been around even in Masonry for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. Why do we still not have universal Prince Hall recognition? And these are just a couple places where we need to have Masons not necessarily rise up, but just try their best to bring about change for the better.
Right. If you see something, say something. This is something that's unacceptable. We have to say something. And remember, you are your Grand Lodge, meaning if you don't like what you see, be the change from within. Don't take the easy way and just admit and get out. Go call your DDGMs and all that and make noise.
Just don't get expelled.
Yeah.
Keep it brotherly.
Yes. In the most friendly manner. Go ahead and do those things. Well, okay, Jason, where are you going to be this weekend?
Oh, hey, this weekend for Saturday only, I'm going to actually be at Grand Lodge down in Virginia, in Richmond. So if you listen to this show and want to come say hi, please come and grab me, not inappropriately. I will have plenty of these to give out, and if you bring your Masonic passport, I will also have our handy dandy, I can't talk tonight, Masonic passport stamper, so you can get a TMR stamp in your passport, and a couple bookmarks, and maybe even some pins from me. Just come on up, say hi, and love to chat.
Great. Awesome. And, we haven't done a show on Grand Lodge communications. That'll be probably something good to queue up in the future.
We'll add it to the backlog.
There you go. It's in the backlog.
Yes. How very agile of us.
The final thing I wanted to bring up for Masonic news is I just got my copy of the Southern Masonic jurisdiction Scottish Rite Journal for the November-December of 2015. I guess it's not monthly, it's semi-monthly. I guess that would be accurate.
Bi-monthly.
Bi-monthly. The Bimon Sci-Fi Con. This is another little reference to Juan Sepulveda was found in their books and gifts, their section near the tail end. So if you have your handy copy, we could probably put a link to, because they're putting things in issue or some sort of online magazine format. Page 27 is a nice little write-up of the Winding Stairs podcast. Apparently the editor was looking through the extras in the Freemason movie DVD and found a reference to Juan Sepulveda's podcast. So shout out to Juan, even though he's not here tonight. We'll still give him props and a shout out that it's not TMR, but maybe someone will click the right link and get over to us someday. All right, congratulations, Juan, in being published.
In a roundabout fashion.
We'll take it. Alrighty, that's all we've got. I mean, we could talk for hours about the Georgia Grand Master's edict and vote, but let's hold off on that. Get into our main topic. But before we do, let's go do some trivia. Nick, will you cover the Masonic Monday question
on Tuesday?
Oh boy, would I ever, John? Well, we had a nice smattering of folks that answered the question correctly, of our viewers and listeners. So, Joey Boyer of Chandler Thunderbird Lodge, number 15. Larry Fama of San Francisco Lodge, number 120, and Palo Alto Lodge, number 346. Matthew Hunt of Asheboro Masonic Lodge, number 699, in the Grand Lodge of North Carolina. And Cody Gustafson of James K. Polk Lodge, number 759, at the Grand Lodge of North Carolina, and also Jared Chapman of Claremont Lodge, number 436, Grand Lodge of California. And the answer to that particular question was J. Raymond Shute II, or J. Ray Shute II, who brought a number of degree systems to our shores, was the titular head of the Masters of Tyr, which would be controlled by the supreme quarry of the world. It was deemed competing against the Grand Lodge of North Carolina and was deemed clandestine. So Shute moved the Masters of Tyr degree to the AMD family. So congratulations, guys. And now to the question for November 2nd, 2015. On November 1st, many Christian churches celebrated All Saints' Day. Although most branches of Freemasonry are open to men of all religious persuasions, most still use Christian symbolism to this day. One rather preeminent research lodge, chartered under the United Grand Lodge of England, uses the Latin designation of these specific martyred saints, who have been associated with stone masonry for many centuries, as its name. What is this Latin name, and what is its English translation? When you have an answer, send it to masonicmonday@gmail.com. Don't forget to include your lodge name, your lodge number, and the hashtag Halloween's over? ? Back to you, John.
Yes, here we are in November, so I'm glad everyone survived, had a good, safe Halloween, and there we are. Moving right into this week's topic, the generation gap in the craft. We are honored to have Eric Diamond on, and I wanted to especially reach out to him because he did an excellent job in his X-Oriente podcast, did a 3-parter, actually. We'll put links directly to those episodes in our show notes. And I wanted to give him the opportunity to kind of rehash his ideas and bring them back to relevant topics, like maybe some things that came up in Masonic news today. So, Eric, if you would kind of give us an overview of what are the various generations that we have in the craft today, and then we can kind of go into how, what influences them, and then what are some of the frictions between them.
Okay, well, I guess to start out, we need to kind of talk about the generations themselves, and people are cohorted into generations based on their attitudes and their values, and most of that is sort of formed as a product of their upbringing, of what things were like when they were kids. And so what makes today kind of interesting is that never before have there been so many generations in Masonry at the same time. And we've got 5 generations in Masonry at this time, and because of that, and because all the generations, especially once you get to the baby boomer generation, through the Millennials, because those generations are so different from one another, you start to get friction between them. And it's not so much that that we value different things in terms of Masonry, but what happens is that we have different styles and different ways that we're used to working, both in our Masonic lives and in our work lives. And so there's really several really good books on it, but what makes this generational cohort thing so difficult is that in many ways, like, the millennial generation has more in common with the greatest generation than the baby boom generation. And when you look at, like, who's in charge of Masonry now, it's generally the baby boomers. The baby boomers, it's the, we've kind of hit the tail end of the silent generation. So let me just go back and list the generations, right? So we have the greatest generation. These are people who grew up in the 1930s, and they fought World War II. And so their experience was shaped by the Great Depression, by poverty, by boom and bust cycles, and so they tend to be very cautious. They're very conformist. I mean, they're the kind of, they were, during the war, there was a lot of sacrifice. It was a lot of, there's a war on, shut up and get going, and these are the guys who fought and won the probably well, certainly the largest, but the greatest struggle of the 20th century. After the boomers came the silent generation, and the silent generation was they were shaped by the war in upbringing, so they were shaped by this, everybody kind of pitching in, and rubber drives and can drives and things like that. And so, but they didn't have the same kind of level of poverty that their parents did, or their older siblings. And so the silent generation is characterized by high degrees of conformism, lots of ambition,
and sacrifice.
And then the next generation is the baby boom generation. So when all those people came back from World War II, they settled down, they got houses, they went to school in the GI Bill, and they had lots of babies. And there was a huge population explosion in the baby boom, and the baby boom is largely characterized by the fact that they were a planned generation. Up until this point, generations really weren't planned. People would get married and then they'd have kids, but in this one, these kids were actually wanted. They were planned for, and so these kids, baby boomer kids, were in a way were kind of coddled. They were given the material things that their the greatest generation parents never had, because their experience was shaped by the Great Depression. So these kids grew up in a kind of a world of privilege. And so what characterizes the boomers is that they're very idealistic, they're very vision driven. They tend to be a bit of an ideologue kind of generation, and they're very tied up in defining themselves by their work and their accomplishment. So they're very ambitious, and and very principle driven, right? So the generation that comes after the baby boomers is Generation X, and Generation X in a lot of ways, and this is my generation, we were the original latchkey kids, right? So as the boomers and the silent generation were sort of coming into the 60s, and everybody was getting liberated and rebelling against social norms and redefining those kinds of things. There was a lot of divorce, and so we were the product of divorced parents, a lot of us, and we were also coming up at a time when women were returning to the workplace. So a lot of us grew up with two parents who worked, and there wasn't a whole lot of things like after-school programs, things like that. So we were kind of left on our own. So we learned to do for ourselves, and so Generation X tends to be very very skeptical. We were promised when we were growing up that if you work hard and do your best, you'll have job security. And of course, I remember in my 20s, like, that was just completely not the case. And in fact, you would be very likely to be laid off just to boost stock price of your company. So there was this sort of this sense of betrayal of the American dream with Gen Xers. They tend to be very cynical. They tend not to care at all about vision or anything like that, and they're very DIY oriented. So Gen Xers are the type of people, we taught ourselves computers, we taught ourselves digital technology, things like that. We're very, the whole DIY thing, like, the rise of places like Home Depot and Lowe's are a direct result of our do-it-yourself ethic. And so we tend to do first and ask questions later. We want to try things out ourselves, and we don't like asking for permission. We don't like waiting for permission. We want to get things done. And we're very, very independent in Xers. Well, the next generation are the Millennials, and the Millennials are the children of the Boomers, right? So the Millennials were raised by these more idealistic parents who have very were very principled growing up. But at the same time, the Millennials started to see the sort of the cracks in the armor of these ideologues, and so they are a lot more skeptical of visioning and things like that, where like the first thing a baby boomer wants to do when they get a group of people together is like, let's come up with a common vision statement. And millennials are not like that at all. Millennials are much more team oriented. They're much more collaborative. They're more likely to be joiners, where boomers and Xers weren't. And they're the first generation that really grew up digital. So they're doing their phones, and they're relying on technology way more. This is the Tinder generation, the swipe left, swipe right, and they're adopting these technologies, very, very rapidly. And millennials are also criticized as having very short attention spans. They're criticized as not wanting to work hard. In many ways, because their parents were so principled as boomers, their parents would advocate for them, sometimes too much. And so millennials, what I find in the workplace is sometimes millennials are a lot more timid about trying new things or taking charge of themselves. They're waiting for permission to be, to be able to do things, or they're waiting for consensus to be able to do things. And so, like, each generation has its strengths. Remember, the boomers were the ones who ended the Vietnam War. They fought for civil rights. So, even though each generation has negatives, each generation also has amazing positives, right? The Xer generation started the dot-com boom, right? So all of those internet companies, all of those, Yahoo and Google and all of those companies were driven by Generation X.
So there's one thing I wanted to supplement everything you said. That was a great introduction. Let's kind of cover some age ranges, so for those listening, they can play along at home and figure out kind of where they fall. Again, it's a loose thing, and by the way, big caveat: this whole episode is a stereotype, right? Just because you're in that range does not mean you are those values. It just talks about a formulative period of time.
Right.
So for the silent generation, they're people born around the mid 1920s to 1940s. Again, those are the people that fought in World War
Actually,
II.
that's the greatest generation.
Okay, and then baby boomers are 1946 to 64. Then you have Gen Xers, which are 64 to about 81. I've seen it as early as 77 and as late as 81. And then the millennials are 1980, early 1980s to 2000s. So we really don't have a label yet for people born after 2000, and which is really interesting. I got thinking about this previous to the show.
I've heard them called Z.
I've heard Generation Z.
Yeah.
Horrible name. I've also, if you think about it, if, like, say in Virginia, you can be 18 years old to join Freemasonry, that means people born in the year 2000 will be ready to join Masonry in a couple of years.
Yep.
It's 2015. So
they're going to miss the tricentennial by 1 year. How much does that suck?
It's going to be a whole bunch of demolays knocking at the door. But yeah, so that's going to be interesting. You know, we have a whole other generation that's even more wired, even more plugged in. And
to make this more complicated, even though the generational cohorts follow the dates that you mentioned, but attitudinally, you got to shift forward about 4 years, right? Because the people who, like, for example, I was born technically a baby boomer, but my attitudes, my values, it's strictly X, because I came in the last year of the boom. My birthday was in October of '64, so I'm practically 1965. So there's a slight attitudinal shift forward. So it's kind of hard to like if you think, here's the thing, if you think like a boomer, you're a boomer. If you think like an Xer, you're an Xer. So there's
right. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is the reason that these stereotypes have been set up is because of formulative events that have shaped that generation. A good way to kind of set waypoints on this is wars, right? So you have World War II, you have the Vietnam War, you have the Gulf War, and you have post 9/11, right? So that shapes, that's an easy one, right? You can also talk about media influences and so forth, but that's an easy way to kind of say, how old were you when these big events happened, and then what was the political aspects of that helped shaped your ideas and your ideology.
Yeah, there's also like a kind of a technology aspect of it too, right?
So, yeah, especially in the later ones.
The greatest generation was the radio generation. The boomer generation was the TV generation. My generation was the MTV generation. The millennial is the internet generation. So it's like it's what we what the kind of a technology that you were raised with, and your comfort level with that new technology.
So now we have lots of different generations, especially in the craft nowadays. Jason, Nick, what do you think are some of the frictions that come along with having of a spread of ages who are trying to be brothers on the level?
Well, it's kind of interesting. When I joined in 2006, my lodge was almost strictly, I wouldn't even say there were many Generation X folks in it. I would say that there were probably baby boomers or silent generation guys. And so it was very different to have to run that lodge as a master. It was kind of my first goal, and it kind of threw off all the guys. I said, we need a website. And, they kind of nodded along and said, sure, that's like a great idea. And I said, no, we need a website that's actually functioning, that actually looks good. Oh, well, how do we do that? Don't worry, I got a guy. It's kind of like, it was one of those that they kind of looked at me like, why would we need one of those? We have a phone right here. I mean, they can call us if they want to come up. It's like,
they know our mailing address.
It's like, well, and that's just it. I mean, it's like, guys, and I kind of explained that, the whole idea of the internet is a little bit foreign to not all the baby boomers. Like, you got Scott Sherman, who is right now, I'm sure, typing something as I'm saying it. But you know, it's just kind of funny to deal with that concept of why would a volunteer organization necessarily need a interface on the web to communicate outside of it? And when I was selling the website to my lodge, I said, guys, we have so much kudzu and vines on this door. You don't see it, but it's there, and people don't even know that we exist anymore. And the second we got that website up, the lodge, all of a sudden, from being a very old-aged lodge, had every age in it. Every age was starting to join. And it's exactly as you were saying. You know, the technology that you grew up with is the one that you expect. And I think that's kind of what I found, is that, you know, once we were able to, you know, have all these different methods, you know, we had an evened lodge, and it kind of found its balance.
That's true, and you know, the technology a lot of times drives behavior. So here's an example of you millennial guys. How many of you guys really hate to actually talk to people on the phone? Like right? So like when your cell phone rings and you don't recognize the number, you consider it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you consider it an imposition. It's considered rude.
Like this. Bing, right on that.
Yeah,
button.
right. Yeah.
Voicemail.
Send it to voicemail, and I find that that's true. You know, like even in my professional life, I work in advertising, and you know, we have a lot of millennials who work with me, and you know, I'm a face-to-face kind of guy. I'm a phone kind of guy. None of the millennials that I work with, they will answer a text. You send them a text message, they will answer it in 30 seconds. You call them, they will not answer the phone. It's a behavior thing, but the implications for Masonry are pretty profound, which means that if you're going to be communicating with people that you want to see in Masonry, you have to communicate to them the way they want to be communicated to. So that means that if you're going to do a Masonic phone tree, right, you're going to lose your millennials. You know,
that's hilarious.
Right?
That's so true. Jason,
a Masonic texting tree, however.
Ooh.
There you go.
So you do both.
Set up a Facebook chat. Yeah.
So
what have you seen, Jason?
One of the things that I've noticed generationally has been, so the millennials, in addition to, you know, being used to being told what to do, they're very skeptical. So millennials they're not content just to accept what's being fed to them or what's being given to them. They say, okay, well, I want to validate this, and I want to figure this out for myself. You're seeing that a lot in Masonry with the resurgent interest in esoteric philosophy. So I've noticed that a lot of the older generations are very much into the social aspect and more the Christian aspect of Masonry, if you will. Saying, well, this is my faith and this is my lodge, and I go here to hang out with my brothers, and I'm not interested in that philosophy stuff. Whereas the younger guys just eat it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's another big difference.
That's another generational shift. Millennials are way more tolerant of diversity than any other generation before them. I mean, why do you think this gay marriage thing is happening now? It's happening now because the millennials are the ones who don't really, it's not really an issue for them. They're like, you know what? It's not, you know, if you don't like to be gay, don't be gay. You know, like that's the, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of the attitude. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about that esotericism thing is that there's also among millennials, it's also they prefer flatter organizations. So this is one of the reasons you're seeing like a lot of friction with, you know, things like Grand Lodges and stuff like that, because they're used to flat collaborative organizations, not hierarchy.
So here we are.
On the other hand, are all about hierarchy.
You're absolutely right. And so again, from like the baby boomers and more especially the previous generation, the silent generation or the greatest generation, they are more rank and file. They do listen to their elders. They do understand you do your time. And then you get the ranks, right?
Time and grade.
You work it, yeah, exactly. you put your time in, you do your 20 years, and then you get your pension, right? Now, from the Xers on, that is not a thing anymore, and so the same thing applies to rank in Masonry. That applies to offices and titles, right? And it also gives us a little bit of empowerment, the later generations, of speaking out and saying, I don't agree with these things. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to make a stink, instead of, well, you just sit in the chair and follow along. Well, you can't really do that to these guys.
Well, and it also brings in meritocracy.
Yes.
Into the mix, because that's huge with millennials.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the funny thing about that whole idea is you want to really piss off a group of older past masters. I will give you a hint. Younger past masters, I'll give you a hint. Tell a new brother, no, you can just call me Brother Nick Johnson. That's fine. The second you say that, I guarantee you will be pulled off to the side, because I've had that happen many times. And you know what I do? I continue to do it, because I'm not Worshipful Brother Nick. I am just Brother Nick, comma, past master. And let me tell you, you're right. I mean, meritocracy, I view it as, yeah, I serve my time in the chair, but I still have other things to do. I've got other projects I have to take care of. It's not just about sitting in the East that 1 year and then I'm set for life. And it's just kind of interesting to see that difference in philosophy between somebody who's like that and somebody who's like, I serve my time. You can call me that. We have, just like that meme that was out there that said, Masonry is on the level. It has many of them. And yeah, it's just crazy to me, because for me, I view this as a flat organization. It's not a pyramid. We aren't a secret Egyptian society. It's I view it as flat. And you try to explain that to somebody, and they just look at you like, no. He's a past grand, and it's like, yeah, and he's also brother blah blah blah.
Right.
Well, like that means something. So I give it an example. Like when X-Oriente is in its 10th year, and 10 years ago when I started it, right, the reason that I started it was because I wanted to have certain kinds of conversations that I was not able to have in my lodge, and rather than wait for the right people to start having those conversations, or to rise far enough in the organization that I was in command enough to be able to start having those kinds of conversations, I said, screw it, I'm going to start my own thing. And that, I was like, that it's that DIY quality of Generation X that said, yeah, a podcast, I'll start a podcast and I'll just see what happens, So it's...
You're absolutely right. And one thing I want to build on that is, again, if you look at why people joined, especially during the peak of Masonry and the generations that were there, it was much more after the war. They wanted the camaraderie, they wanted more of the friendships, the social part of it, and less of the esoterics, right? Robert Johnson brought it up in this week's Whence Came You podcast, that esotericism was a big deal in the 20s and then has waned. And now you're seeing this resurgence again. Why? Because you have more socially, philosophically oriented younger Masons joining. But this big gap in the middle of the 50s and 60s, those who joined at that time frame, it was more for, I need another night to get out of the house, I need to play cards and drink beer with my buddies, and it was less of the introspective philosophy of Masonry.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean I've heard that argument, and
I haven't met many of my past masters then.
No, but I mean the phenomena that you're describing is undisputable, right? Like yes, it's true that people in the past, were much more socially oriented and less. But I have a different explanation for it.
Okay.
Right. I think that that a large part of Masonry was about, from the very beginning was about social mobility. And so in a lot of places, like even as late as the 1950s, you joined the lodge because your granddad was in the lodge, your dad was in the lodge, the mayor was in the lodge, and that's where the guys who were, anybody who was anybody was in the lodge. And so you wanted to be a part of that. And then there was a social life. That's true. I think what's interesting about the reason that millennials are more and more interested in things like traditional observance and esoterics and philosophy and things like that is because, and this is true generationally. This goes even beyond Masonry into the general world at large, and that is that millennials seek meaning. Millennials seek meaning way more than any other generation that's coming before them. They need to know that what they're doing in life makes a difference, and that it has meaning for them. And to put a finer point on it, there's another thing that's really interesting about millennials, and that is that for millennials, experience is status, right? So for a boomer, status is the things that you own, right? Do you have a Rolex? You have a BMW? You live in a beautiful house? Right? But for millennials, it's the fabulous life that you curate for yourself on Facebook. It's the experiences that you have. It's the people that you know, right? It's the selfie that you get to take with somebody famous. That's what conveys status, not what you own, right? And it manifests in all kinds of ways. Like, for example, millennials buy fewer cars than any other generation, and it's freaking out the auto manufacturers, right? Like millennials are like, yeah, ride sharing, sure, no problem, because there's no status in owning a car for them,
or a house at this point,
right?
The
But
housing market.
But millennials are traveling more than any other generation,
Yes, they are.
right?
Mhm. Well, and to that point too, currently I'm in the process of getting together a lodge, Agape Lodge, and it's kind of interesting to go through this process because what I'm learning is that the code that was written by the generation previous to mine, so probably not even the baby boomers, but probably the greatest generation, there was an obsession with conservation, right? Conserve the things that we have because we have to, right? Well, for me, I view our lodge system as, I'd like to build this lodge, see if it goes somewhere, and if it doesn't, let it collapse and try
Do
again with
something else.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and just saying that to somebody who is a little bit older, they look at you like you've gone insane. Like, why on earth would you do something and not hope it lasts 260, 200, 300 years? And for me, it's like, well, I just want to see. It's not so much a proof of concept as much as it's a, why don't we just do this?
Why don't we try? Yep.
Try, yeah.
Well,
It's
that
crazy.
was that's reminiscent of an article that I put out on the Midnight Freemasons a couple weeks ago called "Taking Back the 24-Inch Gauge," where I'm talking about the proliferation of appendant bodies and all of these other Masonic affiliated organizations that are really taxing the Brotherhood as far as time is concerned. And the whole point is, okay, at some point you need to say, hey, which of these can we relegate to the sideline and let die? Cherish the good times with those and record the history, but then move on.
Oh, and you bring up a really, really good point, Jason, because the day of reckoning is coming for all of these Masonic bodies that we have, because once the millennials reach that sort of age of, I call it Masonic maturity, right? Up until, like now I'm kind of the old man of my lodge, but at one time, and this is only like 10 years ago, I was the kid, the new kid, right? And what's going to happen is, as the millennials are only going to stick to those institutions that have meaning for them. So if you're in I'm already starting to see it happen. So if you're one of those guys who joins everything, and a lot of millennials will, just to try it out. So they join the Scottish Rite, but the Scottish Rite doesn't have meaning for them, they're going to drift away from the Scottish Rite. If the Blue Lodge doesn't have meaning for them, they're going to drift away from the Blue Lodge. They're going to stick to what has meaning. And so all of the demands that are being made by the appendant body on millennials without them providing a meaningful experience for them, it's really going to be devastating, and it's going to be, there's going to be I'm afraid a downsizing of organizations. We're already starting to see it, with some organizations. Like, I know that the Cryptic Council at least in Illinois, is I think just struggling to find its voice. Like what, and I've heard talk of like it's going to merge with this body or that body, but these, we have too many appendant bodies, and now there's going to be this Darwinian struggle to like, to come out on top.
Okay, so in the interest of time, let's start wrapping up, because one thing we need to figure out here is what's going to fix it. What's going to get these various generations to work together? Jason, what do you think?
A lot of that is going to be time and understanding.
It takes too long. I don't have time for that.
Well, and that's the thing. We need to have time, because I think the leadership in Masonry, not universally, but the vast majority of leadership in Masonry is filled today by those men who put their time in grade. And they are the 30, 40, 50-year Masons who are the silent generation. And there are very few jurisdictions where I've seen, men younger than 50 in the Grand Line. And part of that is time, and another part of that is the fact that, according to those holding leadership positions, they haven't put their time in yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think over time, spots will open up in leadership to the point where you'll get more of a mixing of generations, whether it be baby boomers, Gen X, and then millennials, or what have you. There will be more of a mixing generations in the Grand Lodge level, and then I think we'll be able to see a lot more cohesion. But right now, it's so stratified because the entire social governance system of Masonry is very stratified.
All right, well, we'll take Jason's word as the final word, because we want to get to social media before we start to wrap up, because you guys have been blowing up the Facebook page. Jason, what are they saying on there?
We have had a lot of good conversation today. So first and foremost, because we have to, I'll start off with a meme from Jared Chapman. What's the point of being afraid of the zombie apocalypse when you're already a zombie? And if you didn't see us earlier, Nick, John, and I were when Eric was talking about the millennials, we were all down with our faces on our phones for dramatic effect. So
yes, that's
go and rewatch it. It's yes, yeah, we weren't distracted at all.
Dude, I don't watch HBO when I'm doing the show. I promise. I promise. I just gotta watch Game of Thrones. Sorry, excuse me.
So we've had so many comments, and I'm trying to scroll through them to get all of them. Talking about titles, this is from Brother Scott Sherman. He agrees that it took him more years than you to come to the realization that the best titles are brother and companion. And other titles are good in formal settings, I suppose, but really Masonry should be about just being a brother, and if you're in the York rate of things, being a companion.
Hear, hear.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's see. So I think one of our brethren, Lucky LB, who's actually a Caucasian Prince Hall Mason, mentioned that he thinks our generation has really benefited from the ability as young Freemasons to have access to research through the Grand Lodge and through websites. Historical data being scanned and available especially. So the information age has spurned a growth in our ability to gain knowledge more so than the mouth-to-ear storytelling that existed.
That's a really good point. I want to build on that real quick. Especially the millennials, they have the ability to have a wealth of research. Again, I said in an earlier episode, Google has scanned many books that are out of print, including esoteric Masonic books. So with a Google search, you can find a lot of good Masonic research. In fact, the past 2 or 3 papers I've written have been entirely from my desktop. I've not had to go to my lodge library or any other library, and so it's all out there for the reading. I'm not talking about secrets are out there. I'm just talking about books written on the philosophy of Masonry that has nothing to do with exposing secrets. It's still out there, and this is access that brethren 10 years ago would have never had beyond their local lodges, library of their copy of Freemasons for Dummies and what have you. So there's, for those who have a thirst for knowledge, again, the esoteric aspect of the young Masons, they now can find it on their own.
Well, and that's actually an interesting question I was going to have for you, Virginia boys. Is okay. So I believe, Eric, you guys have a cipher, right? Or at least something like that, right?
We have a ritual book. It's not in code.
Okay, and we have a cipher, so ours is still in code. But Virginia is a mouth to ear state. How does that generational gap? Does it help the generation gap that you have to expend so much energy learning the work by an oral tradition almost exclusively? Is that effective in the generation gap?
Jason, go ahead.
Some people get it, and some people have a really hard time with it. I have been blessed to have ritual come very easily to me. I can just retain it. I get into the cadence of the words, and being a drummer, I can actually memorize the cadence and then figure out the words through that. But for a lot of people, I think it's actually harder on some of the older lodge members. So the brethren who are coming in their 50s and 60s, that's what I've noticed. Again, not universally, but I think the younger millennials that I've found have been able to pick it up a good bit quicker. But I don't know if there would be any discernible difference with a cipher book, because with the way the cipher books are laid out, you have to know the ritual to be able to figure out what those words in that cipher book are.
Yeah, as for me, I think it would have helped probably, but it may have been only a 25% increase in retention and learning. So that being said, mouth to ear is a pain. I'll lay it right out there, but it's a worthy endeavor. All right. Well, given that, let's start doing final thoughts and shameless plugs. We'll save our guest for the last. Nick, why don't you bring us home on your final thought?
Sure. Well, considering that I have a blog called MillennialFreemason.com, I know a little bit about this stuff. And, it is kind of interesting when Eric when you describe the age of Masonic maturity, and I'm starting to hit that point now. And it's kind of interesting as somebody who is both a millennial and views this technology stuff. See, here's proof positive. I'm back to my iPhone 4. Why? I crushed my iPhone 6 in a car hood. I nearly cried when that happened.
Holy smokes.
I had lost my phone. Yes, so if you want to send your condolences and or checks to the Buy Nick a New iPhone 6 fund, that would be wonderful. But it's kind of interesting that the differences are actually kind of effective in lodges, because you need that. And I talked to Tom Acousti a lot, and he was discussing with me a little bit of something interesting, which is you have some of these organizations where you have the older guys who will pull back a little bit, right? They'll have their own votes, past grandmasters or whatever. And some of them, because they have institutional knowledge, will pull back. While others, like myself, go nuts on change, right? It's like, this whole thing is broken, let's fix it, right? And you need that pull and that tug to slowly get the organization on a groove, You need that fighting. But not fighting necessarily, but struggle. Struggle is good. It helps everybody out. Sometimes it's really annoying. I can tell you that the rules that I'm facing with forming this new lodge are driving me absolutely insane, because they were written by a generation that was concerned about saving things at all costs. But you know what? I appreciate some of the things that they were thinking about and doing, and why they did them. And I have a deeper appreciation after having delved into all this for my for the generations past and their ideals and their perspective. So, you know what? We need all of you, everybody. So, everybody love everybody.
Group hug.
Semi-pro.
Bring it in.
There we go.
Even
Take
the
it easy,
baby
guys.
boomers. We need the baby
Exactly.
boomers, regardless of what I said last week.
He apologized. Trust me. Or did he?
All right.
Moving on.
Let's moving on to Jason to take his lashings. Jason.
So, getting back to the idea of Masonic governance and how generational differences play out in that, I think one thing we might want to consider at some point in time is tweaking the governance structure of Masonry. Right now, like John said, it's a benevolent dictatorship where the Grand Line really has the say in the rule of law. And I think that's where a lot of generational friction has certainly emerged within this past week especially. But that'll lessen as the Grand Lodge gets more integrated among generations. But looking to the future, what happens when the Millennials become the prime Grand Lodge decision makers and movers and shakers in Masonry, and box out the generation after us? I see this as very much a cyclical cycle, and if there's a way that we could work to morph the governance structure of Masonry to have perhaps a little more advisory capacity or some checks and balances, I think that's a way where we could integrate generational differences and start to really celebrate the diversity of generations as opposed to treating them as roadblocks. And it's just something to think of. It'll never happen. Maybe it'll happen, but it's, we can dream and we can hope. But I really think, at least doing something to lessen the autocratic nature of Masonic governance would help remediate a lot of these generational differences that we're struggling with today. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching our show week in and week out. You guys are amazing. Thanks, Jared, for the awesome meme today. Donnie, Dylan, come on, man. You got to give us something. So, yeah, step it up. Come on. It's our official challenge to you, Donnie. So we have some cool stuff in the works with the Masonic Roundtable that we will unveil probably in a couple weeks. So it'll be exciting. It's nothing huge, but it'll be fun. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Alrighty. Let's move to our special guest, Eric. Final thoughts and shameless plugs.
Okay. Final thoughts. First, I have a challenge for Jason.
Okay.
I would like you to think about what will the Grand Lodge of the future look like.
Ooh.
And model that. Like think about like make a prototype so that we can visualize. It's imagine it's 25 years in the future. What is that Grand? How has it changed for the better? Right? What does that Grand Lodge look like? All right. My final thoughts. That every generation has its gifts, and we all have our challenges generationally, but we all have great things to offer each other from our unique perspective and our upbringing. But having said that, millennials are special. I'm sure you guys love to hear this, but millennials are special. They're special because they're a huge generation. They're almost as large as the baby boom was. Right? But unlike the baby boom, which weren't joiners, millennials are joiners. So millennials are going to represent the greatest influx potential influx into Masonry in more than 100 years. Right? So if we play our cards right, we will have a very vital and competent fraternity, because remember, the millennials are the most technologically savvy generation that's ever come on the scene, and they're productive and they're interested in learning and philosophy. And so my season at X-Oriente, we've been talking about social relevance. This generation has the more potential to make Masonry more socially relevant than anything else, any Grand Lodge or any program or any Masonic Service Association or anything has ever done, if we play our cards right. So it's going to be very important for us in the older generations to sort of circumscribe our passions and our proclivities to allow this generation to sort of help guide us into that embarrassment of riches. If we play our cards right, it'll happen. If we don't, and we're seeing this unfortunately in Georgia now, if we don't play our cards right, we're just gonna like make it make ourselves more socially irrelevant than ever before. And just to plug, I'm going to be posting a couple of episodes to X-Oriente. We're going to start our new season soon, and check out if you're not a member of the Philalethes Society, consider it. It's gotten Sean Iyer has taken over as editor, and he is doing a great job with the journal, the publication. I think I'm appearing in the next issue that should be coming out like any minute now. Wrote an article on esoteric philosophy, believe it or not.
Ooh.
So it should be fun, and but it's a good. I've really been impressed with the quality of that publication in the last few years. So that's my shameless plug. Thank you guys for having me. I'm a huge fan of the show, and have me back anytime you like.
Awesome. We're a huge fan of yours, so thank you very much for joining us today. And as I was showing when Eric was talking, this is a chart of births per year. So this is your separation of your generations. This big hump in the middle is your baby boomers. Right after World War II, a lot of babies were born. And then it dips again for Gen X. And around 1980, it starts to have a steady increase. So you can see kind of where the generations are. Right before the show, Jason had a good idea of trying to overlay the Masonic membership with this generational thing. Wasn't able to get it done in time, but I challenge you, the listener, to do the math. That'll be really fun to figure out, is there a correlation, not a causation, but a correlation between the population size and increase in membership.
What would be even more interesting is in addition to that line of the number of Masons, is per capita number of Masons. So in other words, the percentage of the population at any given time, to see if there's a great, in other words, when you have a population spike like that, is there a greater percentage of the overall population that become Masons during those time periods?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated. I love data analytics. I know Robert does too, but this would be really good to reach back into your Grand Lodge and look at the membership statistics, right? Virginia definitely has a committee on membership, a committee on retention. So it's like the data's there; they have it in their database. Can we exploit that and really figure out, again, generationally, what makes them tick, and how do we grow the craft that way? Yep. So final thoughts from me. Everything I've read generationally says, communicate, right? And it works both ways. So there is reverse mentorship that the older generation will learn from the younger generation, and vice versa. The younger generation shouldn't come in as know-it-alls. They should also sit back and really consider the expertise and domain knowledge of those past masters that have been around for 100 years. So the best way to merge these, and we all know that Masonry is a great leveler, right? We literally teach that we're all on the level, that we are all brothers, and that is a unique aspect of this fraternity that you can't find anywhere else. So you can call someone a brother who's literally your grandfather, but because of that, we still have challenges, right? From the age ranges. You're not going to have the people that were in World War II coming over for Xbox night. They're just not going to do it. Right? So you need to find compromises in the craft, but also focus on those things where you focus on your similarities. Right. That's one thing that Masonry does well, is try to focus on similarities instead of dividing men, and emphasize that. So with that, focus on communicating, learning from the generations above and below you, and be a better man. With that, that's all I've got. Thank you very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.